Welcome back to the Shared Practices podcast. This is a little detour episode in our case acceptance. We have with us Paul Edwards. So George, talk to us about Paul Edwards and kind of how you got him on the show and the background here.
Well, first of all, this is a pre-ownership flashback.
Okay.
It's one of our intended designs to have flashbacks to our pre-ownership roots. And this is this is something that I realized one of the things that I overlooked in the process of acquiring a practice is the importance of an employee handbook and solid HR policies. You know, walking into a practice, you're going to get tons of questions every day from employees about all kinds of random things. And after a while, it started like kind of wearing on me to the point where like, I need answers to these questions that are like not just whatever I'm thinking about in the moment. You know what I mean? And so I reached out to, I did some research on what is the best company to kind of work with on your HR issues, employee handbook and support. And I found CEDR Solutions is kind of the, highly regarded company by pretty much everybody. And so I reached out to them and wanted to see if they wanted to come on the show and give us some insight into the importance of some HR issues that maybe dentists don't realize how important they are.
Well, you talk about pre-ownership flashback. This gives me flashbacks more of like PTSD to my day-to-day job in the Army, where leave and sick leave and there's unions that represent all of the employees that are assistants and hygienists and government employees. It's really hard to fire people in the Army. I'm just saying. So they have a whole layer of administrative stuff that if you want to fire someone who's not doing their job as a dental assistant, it is very, very, very difficult. And so having to navigate all these policies can be a huge pain if you don't understand them. So fortunately, you can hire someone like CEDR Solutions to set you up with policies that protect you as a practice owner and also do the right thing for your patients. So we'll go into the interview and then we can talk about this on the back end. Here we go with Paul Edwards. One of the advantages of working with Blue Sky Bio's implants is that if you're already familiar with a given system, whether it's Nobel Active, Nobel Replace, Zimmer, Straumann, Astra, it's really easy to make the switch because you're very comfortable and familiar with that system. You have the drills, you've placed those implants before. But what if you're new to either implants in general or to Blue Sky Bio and you haven't used any of those specific lines? Which one of the 6 lines of Blue Sky Bio implants would you choose? Which is a great question. So let's go back to the Facebook forums. The overall consensus, hands down, is the BioMax line, which is the Nobel Active compatible system, but with a narrow platform, single platform across all of the different implants. Meaning, if you go up in size, you keep the platform the same. What this does is it simplifies your inventory, makes life so much easier. So people were saying, can you get locators for BioMax? And boom, locators, we got locators. How about scanning? If you want to scan this into CEREC, take a tie-base NBA 4.5, and that's it. That one tie base will work for all sizes of the BioMax line. And then the advice when it comes to actually placing the BioMax line of implants is to place them just slightly subcrestal to give yourself room to get that emergence profile and the aesthetics and everything looking just right. So if you were hesitant to try out the Blue Sky Bio implants because of the plethora of options, you were just overwhelmed as to where to start, that is the hands down consistent #1 choice of clinicians who are placing and restoring these implants in their offices. BioMax by Blue Sky Bio.
All right, I have with me here today Paul Edwards from CEDR Solutions, and I'm very excited for today's episode. It's something that I think I underestimated how important it is until after my wife and I bought a practice. We figured out, I think the HR side of things is something that maybe needs to be discussed a bit more. So we're having Paul on today. He's kind of our resident expert, and he's really going to lead, the majority of the episode because it's something that he knows a lot about and I don't know that much about. So I'm excited to have you on today, Paul.
George, I'm happy to be here.
So why don't you go ahead and just tell our audience a little about yourself and what you guys do?
Okay, so my name's Paul Edwards. I am one of the co-founders of CEDR HR Solutions. We provide HR support. We provide customized and crafted employee handbooks for each one of our members. We call our clients members. And we also provide a pretty cool software platform for everybody so that they can use that to distribute their documents, keep track of all their employee information. And on top of that, if you guys need payroll or anything like that, obviously that's something that we help handle as well.
Perfect. And how long have you guys been in the field? And you guys are specifically for dentists, correct?
We are. We specialize in dental and medical. We've got about 1,800 practices that we support on pretty much on a daily basis. We've been doing this since 2006. I created the company I created the company in 2006. We really didn't start taking on members until about 2008 as we were kind of ramping up and specializing our knowledge because, we work in all 50 states. And that takes quite a bit of a bank of knowledge and support to be able to do that and support people in all those states. So yeah, we've been doing this since 2008, and it's been a pretty awesome thing. And we do specialize in dental and medical. A vast majority of our clients are dental, and that gives us that gives our members kind of an advantage because. Yeah, I mean, imagine you could ask a question of someone who has the benefit of working with like 1,800 dentists on a regular basis. I mean, you really get it's not just that we're experts and can help you with your HR issue and your problem solving with your employees. It's that we are talking to everybody everywhere and we're getting good ideas and seeing how things work constantly from other people as well.
So in terms of, the 1,800 dentists that you guys work with, what kind of things do you do for them?
Well, the main thing that we do, and I think it's something that a lot of people get, they're surprised and pleasantly surprised that this is available, is we provide ongoing HR support and problem solving. So that's the first thing that we do for them is, every single issue that you have with an employee probably has some kind of regulation or law attached to it. So for example, 32 different jurisdictions now have a mandatory paid sick leave law. And how that comes into play, obviously, is that if you have this law, you have to follow it and understand its regulations. But it can come up also in kind of a daily way. Let's just say an employee asks for time off. You say, no, we're shorthanded, or it's the day before a holiday. And then they just call in sick the day before and they take the holiday and just kind of extend their leave. That's the kind of issue that we get all the time. It's like, what can I do here? And in these states that have these mandatory paid sick leave laws, we have to handle that problem differently than we do in a state that doesn't have it at all. We can put a different rule in different places. And that kind of having to problem solve and make sure you stay in the regulations is something that all of your dentists are going to face throughout their entire career. And the other thing that we do, and I mentioned it before, is we need to customize a handbook for you. So a handbook, there is no handbook that can work everywhere. So you can't download a handbook off the internet and make it your own. You can, but you won't get it right because there isn't one size that fits all. So the number of employees that you have, the state that you're located in, the city that you're located in are all going to affect which policies should go in your handbook and how the policies should read and which laws you should follow and which laws you shouldn't follow. So for us to be able to offer that high level of support to you and for you to be confident, once you learn these regulations and these rules, for you to be confident in what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, you need a foundation to build on, and that employee handbook is that foundation. And it takes quite a heavy lift. I think one of the biggest myths out there is that, a customized employee handbook doesn't need to be crafted by a professional. I mean, I think it's one of the biggest myths that we find is that doctors think that because you're smart and you are smart and you do understand your business and what you need to do, that you can create this book on your own. And a lot of people do it. And when we get a hold of the book, we look at it, we find all kinds of things that have been put in it to help solve problems, but they're also violate some kind of regulation or employment law someplace. And then, again, we're talking about what do we provide for people? Well, we realized 5 or 6 years ago that if we weren't providing some kind of, cool software to go along with this, then it wasn't going to, we would, basically we wouldn't be able to compete in the market. And so we started developing our own HRIS systems, just human, resource information system. And it's like I said before, it's got timekeeping attached to it. It's got HIPAA training inside of it. All of that stuff on demand. It's got a connection to our experts inside of it. And then it's got a way for you to, basically we say you can do anything you need to do with regard to HR on a daily basis in under 30 seconds, usually in just a couple of clicks. And so that's the main way that we're going to support a practice. And for For those guys out there, for those dentists out there, I say guys, it's, you guys are graduating 50-50 male and female from dental school now. For those folks out there who are coming in, a lot of what we're talking about today are things that really are going to affect you, whether or not you're taking over a practice, whether you're in a transition, or whether or not you're in a startup. One of the things I want them all to know, George, is that as soon as you take over, there's no grace period for when your liability starts. And, just as important or maybe related is it's not so much the liability, but your responsibility to understand and comply with all of the rules that apply to you when it comes to being an employer. So knowing how to classify people properly, understanding, again, what the rules are in your state when it comes to managing your employees. A lot of folks think, they get the message that they're in a at-will state, and they think that that's kind of an armor, a bulletproof armor that they can put on, and they can pretty much do what they want to do. And I think we all know that that's not true either. And so we kind of help bring all this stuff together and do it in a way that you feel like you've almost got a full-time person working with you when you need them. But you get to focus on the things that you guys want to do. I think, George, you're probably stunned by the amount of stuff that you had to do when you first started your practice, right? I mean, just the sheer number of things on your list to get done to operate your practice.
Oh, yeah. And I think, it was also surprising, the number of requests for all kinds of random things that you get from your staff and,
Right.
things that you're responsible for that you're, I guess, weren't expecting.
George, did you do a transition or did you do a startup?
We bought a practice and then employed the seller as an associate.
And employed the seller. And how many of the employees did you hold on to?
All of them.
And so weren't they all like, well, do I get to keep my vacation? And, they were just coming to you just with a constant barrage of these questions that employees should be asking about, correct?
Correct. That's why we, I think we sought out the handbook and some sort of documentation to help us answer these types of questions because, I think our default was to just say that we're going to keep things the same.
Yep.
And, there's, I think if I didn't have my seller there to ask questions to on how they handled certain situations, it would have been a lot more challenging.
Yeah.
But yeah, you just get a lot of questions all the time and it's difficult sometimes to have the right answers right away.
Well, especially if the seller's just doing what the seller's always done. And the seller may not even have it right. So, I mean, some of the common things that we see people out there, I think it's kind of like you adopt a bad habit that was there before you, and it's the way people did things. So that's the way you do it. I had a guy, he did a transition. He purchased a practice that he worked in for a while. He worked there for about 3 years. He purchased the practice. The practice was high operating. He paid a pretty penny for it. It was a good practice. Had, I think, a total of 18 employees in it. 4 of them were hygienists. All 4 of the hygienists were misclassified. 2 of them were misclassified as salary only, so they weren't tracking any of their hours, and that's not okay. And the other 2 were classified as independent contractors and had been working for the other dentist for many years. And when the problem came up, the problem came up because one of those hygienists, they had trouble with her and they fired her. She went to an attorney and he started asking these types of questions. Well, when the problem came up and all these people were misclassified, the first question was, why did you do this? And he was like, well, this is what they were doing before. I thought it was okay. I mean, I talked to his CPA, not about that specifically, but nobody ever brought any of this stuff up. And so, you just got to be careful and make sure as you're coming in as a new dentist, you got to make sure that you understand this stuff at least once in your career, at the beginning of your career, and kind of, make sure that your understanding is right. Because ultimately, if it's not right, as this gentleman learned, as this doctor learned, he had to go back and pay a whole bunch of back pay and a lot of overtime that wasn't paid. And he also had to pay legal fees in this instance because it wasn't ferreted out by the practice itself, during the sell. It was ferreted out by an attorney. And so it came back in the worst possible way that it could come back. So, that employee handbook, another important part of it is that it should come complete. If it doesn't come with training, like a couple of hours of training and the ability for you to be a part of the customization, I mean, in our processes, there's like 50 ways there's 50 different areas that you have say in. You get to say whether or not holiday pay is paid or unpaid. You get to say which days are going to be holidays. And I'm not going to go down the entire list, but there's a lot of places where you have a lot of say in it. But on the other side of it, the book should come as a compliant book. In other words, the rule that is in it about sick leave has to comply with the state law. The rule that is in it that talks about the amount of time that an employee is allowed for temporary disability like pregnancy leave needs to comply with the state and federal law. Now, and it also needs to comply or take into consideration the number of employees you have. So very, very important that the document that you get is really, made for you and that it comes with a ton of education. And most of the time when you look at where you're going to get books from, you're going to borrow it. And, this is great for dentists. I always say this when I'm on stage. George, is borrowing a handbook is kind of like borrowing somebody's toothbrush. You don't know where that thing's been or what it's carrying. We have lawyers out there. You can get a very good book from your attorney or from an attorney who does this all the time for a living. They need to be specialized in the area of HR. But typically the book doesn't come with all of the other things that you need, job descriptions and everything else. And the books are not generally, this isn't true about all law firms out there, but they don't have a really good understanding of HR. If you ask them what's the difference between a hygienist and a dental assistant, they might not even be able to tell you. They aren't considering what it is to manage a team. They're trying to keep it down as simple as they can because their thinking is that if you get yourself in any trouble, they can get you out of it. And for us, that's not the way to be thinking about it. And even though we have, 12 attorneys working here, our thought process is you should never be in the problem in the first place. And so that requires that you get tons of education and we spend more time with you and that you get the kind of support that you need there. Another place that you can see employee handbooks come from are from your payroll companies and people like that. And again, I would submit they don't have the specialized knowledge for your industry. When we first started doing this, I think it was 2014 before we saw the two major payroll companies actually put a HIPAA policy inside of an employee handbook. So they were handing practices like yours, an employee handbook as part of payroll, charging you $3,000 for it, and they weren't even addressing HIPAA inside of it. And so, all handbooks aren't made the same. There are other organizations like us out there that have this kind of specialized knowledge. If you're going to do one, and I think you should, you want to make sure that you come to a good source and a source that kind of understands your business as well.
So benefits of a handbook is it mainly, I guess, liability protection? Or because from my perspective, I always felt like the big benefit was operational simplicity, like having a predetermined answer to questions and not having to worry about it.
That's very true. I mean, you and I we aren't keeping track of what the decision was that we made 2 years ago about how much time someone can take off for a disability for pregnancy. But if we go to the handbook and we look at it, we'll see that we decided that at some point it was 6 weeks was the right amount of time, or 8 weeks or 12 weeks, or whatever you guys want us to put in the handbook. That way, when someone comes to us with that kind of question or a question about, hey, do we get paid for a holiday if it falls on a day that we don't normally work? That should be in your employee handbook. So operationally, there are a ton of things that need to be in there. But on the liability side, we can protect you at about 150 different ways inside your employee handbook. And that's the message that we really like to get out there is for everybody who's listening to understand that every law and regulation that protects an employee just protects them. They don't have to do anything. They don't have to issue an employee handbook to you or a notice to you or any of that stuff. It all protects them. But for you, it doesn't work that way. And the courts are really clear about this. They tell people, look, first of all, George, you've heard this, ignorance of the law is no excuse. That you can't come and say, I didn't know about it, and that's why I didn't follow it. The other thing that they tell employers is we've given you mechanisms to protect yourselves in these areas. And those mechanisms include policies. And if you distribute a well-written, compliant policy, then you can shift the burden from you to the other side. And that's what you want to do. If someone comes to you and says, 6 weeks or 6 months after you let them go, and they come with an attorney or someone and say, hey, that was a wrongful termination, and they give you a litany of things that they accuse the practice of. And by the way, you were sexually harassing, or someone in your business was sexually harassing this employee, you want to be able to have the foundation for your legal team to be able to say to them, yeah, but your client now, my ex-employee, had an obligation to let me know that there was sexual harassment going on. They acknowledged in the employee handbook that they had to tell me that was going on, or they had to tell me that something wasn't safe, or that I had not paid them properly, and they knew that they had worked overtime and not been paid for it. So those are just a few examples where you can actually really help yourself by having the right policy in place. Now, George, imagine that you have the wrong policy in place, or you've written something that is not legal and it's in your handbook, and now it's in your own words. It's you. You put that in there, you distributed it, and now you've got a problem that you really can't get yourself away from. When you work with us, dentists in Texas learn, for example, that by not carrying workman's compensation, and they don't have to, the state of Texas doesn't require it, you learn during our customization process that if you're in Texas and you don't carry workman's compensation, that you can't flip an injury over on the employee and make them go down and take a blood test to see if they were impaired while they were at work or when they were injured. And so these are all the little subtleties that self-made handbooks don't really bring to the table for you. So yeah, it is an operating manual. Not an SOP manual, but an operating manual, a reference point for everybody to go back to. But it's also legal protection, very much legal protection, if it's put in place and it has good policies there.
So now I want to talk to you about, I guess some of the support that you guys offer. I feel like it's underrated. I initially contacted you guys about a handbook, but I found a lot of value in the support due to kind of these issues that we're talking about and things that come up and knowing how to address them. The handbook is the guide, but we don't know all the intricacies. So can you kind of talk about that from a dentist perspective and, things that arise after an acquisition, after a handbook is in place, that, are challenging and, HR issues in general?
Yeah, sure. So first things first, updates. So state and federal law changes on a pretty regular basis. We updated for about 150 law changes across the country last year, both federal and at the state level. So that's the other thing is anybody could put a handbook in place for you today, and the legislator could pass a law the following day or the following month or, at some point in the future, and your handbook would need to likely be changed, and your understanding of how you're handling something would need to change. So there's that. And we're a great resource for that because that's our job, to keep you informed and to make the changes in your handbook for you and to do all those things. On a regular day-to-day basis, we get all kinds of questions. So I saw this question the other day come across our system. We have a system for keeping track of all the requests for help that we get from our members. By the way, all of the people who work for us, who work for you guys out there, who are in what we call our solution center, they are experts. Most of them have a law degree, and those that don't have a law degree have so much experience in employment law and at HR that they qualify to be able to be experts in this area. So first thing is we've got super knowledgeable people on the phone, and they're not just talking to you about the legal issue. In fact, they're problem solvers. So they understand that they can answer your question. You may say, "Can I fire this employee?" And they'd say, "Yeah, you can fire this employee." But they also might say, "You know what? We've been talking. You've called in about once a month over the last 6 months. And each time you've called in, it's been about letting go of someone at your front desk. It seems like you're having some turnover there. Do you want to talk about hiring better in the first place and why you're getting so much turnover? What's going on in that area?" And in a little bit of conversation, we find out that we have a doctor who's overwhelmed, just took over a new practice, certainly isn't trained in hiring people, doesn't have a lot of spare time, only has 4 employees at this time, doesn't have a lot of time to be able to just sit down and stop and hire well, hasn't had anybody have a talk with them, and we're able to make a difference in their life by going, hey, here's how you hire better. Here's a system for doing that. I saw this question the other day. Doctor was just basically expressing that his entire team, George, I'll use his vernacular, they suck. And he just went on to describe, people that are gossiping, fighting with one another, not literally, but, just that backbiting, not getting along, him really feeling like anytime he would raise you guys need to improve, somebody need to improve in some area, get a lot of back talk and pushback on it. And what he wanted to do was he wanted to have a team meeting. He wanted to pull everybody into the meeting, and he just kind of wanted to just have a come to Jesus conversation with them and just say, everybody better straighten up, or I'm going to cut this, and I'm not going to do this, and I'm going to start hiring new people. We were able to, first listen, because that's our job too. And we empathize with them. We understand what's going on there, but we were able to coach them to understand that if you're having an individual problem with someone, you don't bring it to the entire team. You have to pick these people off one at a time. You got to sit down with them. You got to say, look, this is the issue that we're having here. This is the impact it's having on the practice and on you and in the position you're doing. And this is where I need to see you improve. And so that's just a little sample of how we try and help managers and help owners and doctor owners get better at what it is that they do. Because George, how much time do you spend with your team every day? How many hours? Yeah, all day. You throughout your career will look back and realize that you spend more time with your employees than you do with your own family some weeks. It's a never-ending job. And so your ability to create good relationships, accountability, to be able to lead people starts at the time that you purchase the practice. And George, I bet you can confirm this, because I've listened to your podcast. I hear what you guys are up to. You guys have figured something out, which is the sooner you figure out all these little components that make a real difference, the better your lives are going to be. And I would submit to you, the sooner you're going to pay off your loans, the earlier you're going to be able to retire, and the more money you're going to have in your retirement accounts. And all of that goes back to your employees and the systems that you put in place, which is what you guys focus on in your podcast all the time. The better you get at leading, the better you get at having these tough conversations with employees, the better your life's going to be as an employer.
Two of my good friends and classmates, Danielle and Austin Davis, have recently done a phenomenal startup. They've documented this on Dentaltown as well as on the Shared Practices Facebook page. And as of their latest update on our page, they were well on their way to breaking $100,000 in collections with a 40% overhead. And this is 3 months into a new practice. One of the companies that they have zero reservations recommending is Design Ergonomics. Des Ergo helped them fit 8 operatories comfortably into their 2,600 square foot practice. So their average square foot per operatory, when you include everything else, is 325 square foot per operatory, rather than the industry 500 square foot per operatory. This has allowed them to keep their overhead low. They have a beautiful office, and they couldn't be happier. If you want Design Ergonomics help to maximize your square footage while maintaining a fantastic flow and layout that is both economical and efficient, go to desergo.com, DESERGO.com, and use the promo code DESIGN today to get $500 off your blocking diagram and floor plan.
So Paul, I got a question for you.
Sure.
I think, you ask dentists, I've seen polls on Dentaltown about the most stressful part of a dentist's life, and they always say it's their staff. Mm-hmm. And I think specifically, a lot of things that dentists are frustrated with is I want my staff to do X, but they don't do it, whatever it is. And, is that the type of question that somebody brings to you in your role, or is it more of a, is that more of a, not an HR issue?
No, that's an HR issue. That's for sure an HR issue. So they come to us and say, look, we've got an employee who, George, how about habitually late? They're just late all the time. In your handbook, if it's written well, you're going to have something that we call progressive corrective coaching. We actually named it that. There's other names for it out there, and it's a set of mechanisms for having a conversation with someone who needs to improve. And in this case, we're going to talk to them about the issue, which is, you're late. And when you're late, it has an impact on everybody else. That impact is that when you're 10 or 15 minutes late in the morning and your job is to take, the phones off the answering service, pick up the messages, figure out where we've got holes in our hygiene schedule. Your job is to get that ball rolling as soon as we get in. When you're late, someone else has to do that for you. And when they're doing that for you, then they're not doing their job and they're getting behind in their role in the practice. And the next thing you know, it starts to affect the patients. And then finally we come up on 11:30 and we're 2 patients behind and we're supposed to be closed for lunch. And now everybody's got to stay through lunch and catch up these 2 patients. And a lot of this is caused by you consistently being late. I don't know if you know it or not, we're looking at the time cards here, and we're showing that you've been late 5 times in the last 5 weeks. And what we're shooting for is everybody's on time every single morning. And what I need you to do is I need you to look back to why I hired you. And I need you to look back to that, 3 months ago when you and I were sitting here and you told me how much it bothers you for other people to be late to a meeting. Remember when we talked about that? And so what I'm telling you now is that I need you to be on time all the time. Can you do that? I need that commitment from you, because if you can't do it, we need to know right now, because we're going to have to make different arrangements. And so, George, that's the kind of conversation that we teach, people to have. And so I can apply that kind of methodology to all sorts of things. We've had employees hit each other. We've had an employee using PHI, going into the record and using it improperly. She then was using the information to stalk men who were coming to the practice. It was kind of weird. Again, we get these kind of weird calls all the time. It was kind of weird. She was picking bodybuilders. She was attracted to bodybuilders. She was using the information from the practice in order to friend them and kind of stalk them on Facebook. Well, when we got this issue and they found out what was going on, because 2 of the gentlemen called in to complain over about a 3-week period, and they would put 2 and 2 together. The other thing that we had here, George, was a HIPAA violation. We actually had a violation, a misuse of that information, and there was a little process that they needed to go through on that side. I've had, obviously, we get embezzlement calls. It's not something that happens all the time, but it happens way more per year than any of you would want it to. If you're listening out there, it's happening. I don't want you to suspect everybody, but I'd like for you to have good systems in place. Not so much for preventing it, and I do want good systems for preventing it, but I just want everyone to know that if someone's is determined to steal from you, you cannot prevent them from doing it. You can keep putting in different barriers, and you can think that you're preventing them from doing it, but a good determined thief will just see that as a challenge, and they'll find a workaround. So the real way to understand whether or not you are being embezzled from is to have a good understanding of the other side of your balance sheet. So you know how much you're charging, you know how many patients came through the door. You should know how much how much income your software says you should be bringing in, and you should be monitoring your software to make sure that no one's altering any of those things. And so it's the other side. It's kind of a reverse audit and look at what's going on that catches embezzlers. We get calls about just, George, this one sticks out in my mind. A lot of you guys don't realize this. As you move through your careers, you're going to have people that work for you for longer and longer periods of time. I've had more than once, I've had to handle a call where we're figuring out that an employee has Alzheimer's before her family is figuring it out. And if you look at the numbers on that, if you look at the research on it, it is the workplace that usually notices the problem first. And there is a humane way to handle that, and there's a wrong way to handle that. We have employees try to It's not just employees trying to do bad things. Like we've had employees try and game a workman's comp system and those sorts of things. But it's not all about people are up to bad things. It's just that people are up to things. The upsets occur between employees. Not every dentist that owns a practice should be considered the best manager. I mean, just because you own a business doesn't make you a great manager. You got to be focused on being better at that. A lot of guys focus on the treatment, and they get managers to manage. A lot of dentists out there take a different approach to it. It kind of runs the gamut. But yeah, we take this year, we're on track to take about 14,000 issues from those 1,800 offices. And they will range everything from the little request to I've got somebody who's going on maternity leave. Tell me again what I'm supposed to do and what documents I'm supposed to issue and how this is supposed to go, to those more difficult ones, which I just described in the last 5 or 10 minutes.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think kind of went on a tangent there, but I think for the most part, I think any issue would you guys say that any issue with employees is something that you got, is there anything that would not be handled by you guys as an issue with an employee?
On the HR side, look, if it's health insurance or something like that, that's not our game. Now we have a partner, a referred partner inside of our system, but for the most part, whether it's timekeeping or just writing somebody up or creating a better job ad or a better job description, or you're having a really difficult issue with an employee, all of those are things that you're going to want to call us. You don't want to just call us when your hair is on fire. It's in those very simple, seemingly innocuous conversations where we ferret out that an employee's been, say, misclassified. So I had a doctor who had an employee who worked for him for 26 years. He did not care for her the entire time in retrospect. And I asked him, I said, how long have you been in this fight with her, this kind of this relationship? And he said, man, it's been going on forever. And he let her go. He fired her for a good reason. We weren't involved in that process, and she turned around and filed a claim for him not paying her properly for overtime, and ended up in a huge settlement. So if he had called us and we had talked about it, we would have figured out that he had her misclassified. I guess that's the point I want to make, George. You don't wait till your hair is on fire to talk to us.
Got it. So yeah, I mean, I think an emphasis on prevention. I think that would kind of go without, I think that should be hopefully something that people take from this episode, is that, being a solid kind of backing and, risk tolerance, liability coverage on the HR side, can really help before an issue actually flares up and, causes you to lose sleep and whatnot.
Yep, absolutely. How you handle things matters. And we're not all natural at doing that. So when you're talking to us and we're trying to help you through even a difficult situation, it's also how you handle it that has the best outcomes. Can have the best outcome if you've got good help and experience behind you.
Paul, I have a question for you. We were talking on the phone and, off air before we got on, and I think we had a great discussion about associates. And I thought, that's something that isn't talked about enough. Mm-hmm. Did you have time to talk about that on this episode?
Yeah. Let's jump into it, because they're employees as well.
Yeah, and I think they're a different kind of employee, but maybe I'm being a little bit selfish since we're hiring one. But I think it's a part of the whole equation that I don't think is discussed enough. So can you kind of talk about associateships in general and what makes them successful, and how to structure an agreement and arrangement that works for everybody?
Sure. So we do associate agreements, and that was also one of the things that we started with in 2008. So we've done several hundred of them, and probably done them with thousands of different associates through our members. The first thing I want you guys to do is make sure that you get your classification right on your associate. Your associates are not independent contractors. They are your employees. And if you misclassify any employee, including an associate, as an independent contractor, and either of you get audited, you are the one who's going to end up having to pay the back taxes and the penalties. Your associate can't indemnify you from this through an agreement. Your associate does not have the responsibility to classify themselves properly. So just understand that. And if you go to a CPA, if you go to not your accountant, but to your CPA, and you ask them this question about associates and classification, They are, I'm to a great certainty, I've never asked a CPA this and gotten the wrong answer. They're going to tell you the same thing that I just told you. The fact that they work for more than one practice has no bearing whatsoever on whether or not they're classified as an employee or not. So that's the first thing that I want you guys all to get. Now, because I'm talking about associates in the employment context, I'll talk about what does make an independent contractor an independent contractor. And George, that's when that person is doing the work that you don't do. They are coming into your practice to do something. So, for instance, George, I think I gave you this example. We have a practice I can think of. It's in a rural area. Being able to refer someone out to a surgeon, to a surgeon is very difficult for them to do. So they bring a surgeon into their practice twice per month. It's like on every other Thursday or something like that. That's when they schedule those difficult cases. That surgeon is coming in to be a surgeon and to be able to administer sedation. And that's not something that the practice does, and he can be classified as an independent contractor. So there are instances where that classification fits. The other thing that you want to know is that with an independent contractor, no matter where you are, you can't have a non-compete with them, and you can't control certain aspects of your relationship with them because of the nature of the agreement. So a lot of times what I'll find is I'll find that someone sends in an agreement they've gotten from somewhere, and not only is the doctor misclassified as an independent contractor, the darn thing has a non-compete in it, which again is not enforceable. So it was kind of useless. And in California, that actually is illegal. It's actionable. You could get in trouble for it. So, make sure you have your classifications right. The next thing is make sure that you guys are clear on compensation. What is the compensation model? How is the associate going to be paid? What is the associate not going to be paid for? What are you going to reduce? How are you going to, what are you going to take off before you pay the employee? George, my simple answer to this is that the associate gets paid a percentage on everything that the practice gets paid for. A lot of times that's called being paid based on collections. That's not exactly the right language for it, but it is the right thinking. It's to say that if we don't get paid for it, we don't collect any money, we're not going to pay a percentage against it. That is generally one of the best ways to compensate associates. Now, if you're hiring an associate who is fresh out of school, they got a bunch of debt behind them, they may be concerned that they want a base rate of pay or something like that. You can always put a base rate of pay in, and also on top of that, give them a commission. So there's different ways that you can structure it. There are infinite ways that you can structure this, but it really all comes down to what percentage are they going to get paid. The other parts in the agreement that you're going to want to address, you're going to want to talk about insurance. What kinds of insurance should they carry? You're going to want to get them in per occurrence insurance instead of having to pay for tail coverage if they terminate, if they leave. George, we like for the agreements to be at-will agreements. Doesn't feel quite right sometimes because you don't want someone to just quit and walk out on you one day. But on the other side of that, if things aren't going well in any working relationship, you want to be able to end it as quickly as possible. You're also going to want to cover, and this is a big one, and this is a gift from me to you guys because it's not something that I don't think I've ever put this in a podcast before. It's a typical mistake, is that I see at the end of the agreement that it tells the parties to the agreement that they may not assign the agreement. Meaning that if they can assign this agreement to someone else. Well, that's all well and fine when you're thinking about the associate being able to assign it to somebody else. That'd be crazy pants. But George, what if you go to sell your practice? I mean, if you go to sell your practice and you have a non-compete in place that's not assignable to the person who buys your practice, then shouldn't the person who's buying your practice devalue your practice? Shouldn't they lower their offer? I mean, right? I mean, why would you pay someone if their associate's non-compete stops and they can go across the street and just open up? So there are all these little nuances inside of associate agreements that need to be handled properly. And I'm going to confirm something else, George. No agreement is better than the two people shaking hands. I agree with that. I don't have a problem with handshakes. Where we do run into issues is that once there's an upset and things aren't going right, that's when these agreements come into play. And that's the reason to have the agreement and have a really well written one in place.
Got it. And from a, you know, in terms of like I know one thing we had talked about on the phone was, a track for continued growth throughout the course of that associate's life at the practice.
Yeah.
What kind of things can you build into the agreement to kind of allow for that associate to feel, or to actually, kind of develop and grow in their role? And, what kind of things do you guys like to talk about?
Oh man, I love that question. So if you want to keep someone, there's two ways to keep them. You help them. If you guys are familiar with Maslow's law, self-actualization was Maslow's theory at the top of the pyramid. Everybody's working toward. You always want to be getting better at what it is that you do. And so I think one of the top components is self-actualization. One of the top components to happiness and relationship to work and feeling like you're moving is to be in a position where you are, where the job that you do and the people you work with have a clear vision for going forward. And so you want to not only think about your business that way in strategic planning, you also want to think about the people who work for you, and particularly for the professionals that work for you. And so some of our doctors incentivize their associates by using a pay scale. The better that they do, the more patients that they're able to treat, the fewer callbacks that they get, all of those things, the higher percentage that they can earn from the practice. And then you've got things like continuing education. If a person wants to go and take more courses and learn about sedation dentistry, if they want to get better at particular things in the practice, then you say to them, you can go out there with my approval and you can take these courses and I will reimburse you for them. So that's one of those things in the agreement that you think about. And you don't say, I'll just pay for the course and send you out to take it. You say, you can go take the course, you pay for it. And when you come back and you've been here for 6 months, then I will reimburse you for the course. And that kind of takes away one of those concerns about paying for other people's education. On the other hand, I have doctors that say, nope, he's not proficient or she's not proficient in a certain area. I need him to learn this right away. I'm going to build it right into the agreement. I'm going to go ahead and set aside $4,500 a year. We go out as a team all the time. I want them to participate in these, like if you go to breakaway, I want them to come with me when I go. And so I'm going to build in systems which reward them for buying into my systems and going to these courses and doing all these things. I think the other thing too, with an associate and with your entire team, all the way down to the person who answers your phones, which I would argue is one of the most important people in your business. Because, if they don't get it right, you never get to treat that patient. All the way through, part of being a leader and the hard part about being an owner is you do have to take care of other people. And one of the ways you take care of them is you create a path and a plan, you check in, and you're always working with people to help them get better. You're always working with them to open up and remove the barriers and make it so they can get better at whatever it is that they do, and so that they're cross-trained and that they're better and better at the systems until what you do is you stop, George, and you look around and you say, every single person here is a difference maker. And the way that people become difference makers is through your leadership and you building in a vision and telling people this is where we want to be next year. And this is where we want to be 6 months from now. And let's check in now. Now that we're 3 months on the way to that path, let's check in now. And let's talk about where we are on the way to that. And in the middle of that is a lot of HR, just a ton of HR.
I think that's great. I love that. I've noticed that as well as, staff that have been there for a while, they'll just leave because they don't feel like they are moving, growing, or whatever. And I think people just have that innate desire to grow and get better and learn. And I think as an employer, it's our responsibility to put them in situations where they're constantly growing, evolving, changing, and add, continued excitement to their work life.
Yeah, it could be anything. It could be better communication between them and other people. It could be better communication on how they talk to patients. There's always some room for improvement. And it applies to every single person in the equation, including the doctors who are listening right now.
I love that. And Paul, do you have anything else for our audience? I think A lot of them, probably don't know much about HR, and they probably got a lot of information from you, which, is awesome. Did you have anything else that you wanted to offer up to them?
Yeah, George. Look, everybody, you can reach me I'm going to give you my personal email. If you're listening to this and you want to know more about what we do and how you can get support from us, you can send an email to me at Paul, Paul, at cedrsolutions.com, CEDR, and then the word solutions.com. You can reach out to us at 602-476-1418. You can visit the website. If you're listening to this and you're about to transition, or you just got your practice, or you're just getting a startup, I'd like for you to feel free to send me an email and say, look, I'm new. You could just be in your fourth year or third year of dental school. If you'd like to reach out to me, I'll reply to you, and I'll put you in a kind of an HR course, so that you can begin to get some of these things and kind of dig down into them and kind of upgrade your HR knowledge and really kind of jumpstart your leadership career. So I'd be happy to do that if anybody wants to get in touch.
Wow. Thank you, Paul. I think that'll be something that a lot of people are going to jump on. We'll include your email in the show notes as well.
Okay.
So if you didn't catch that, if you're driving or whatever it is, that'll be in the show notes of this episode for Paul to get in contact. Well, we appreciate you coming on, Paul. I think it was a great episode. Thank you very much.
George, that was awesome. You guys are doing a great job with your podcasting. I enjoyed downloading them as the new ones come up. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it a lot.
Thanks, Paul.
Okay, so that was dense. That was a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff that's kind of like annoying. It's like you don't want to deal with any of this stuff, but you have to.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah, and I think one of the main takeaways I took from it is how everything that there's way more things that are HR related issues than you ever realized. Like the way you talk to team members and give feedback, the way that you just interact with your team on an everyday basis. So much about that is an HR issue. And if you ask most dentists out there, their main stress comes from team related issues. And so I think that's where the main benefit comes from, having somebody who you can talk to about these things, and what's the best way to tell a team member this, and what's the best way to handle this situation. All of those things are stuff that we deal with on a weekly basis. And so I think it's nice to kind of realize that, this is an HR issue that we're unequipped to handle until we get some proper guidance, I think.
Yeah. And this is one of those things that don't do this DIY. Like, it made me realize in the episode. So he said, this is not an SOP manual. Like, this is not the Mark Costes, all this business systems that you have baked into your practice to make it more efficient. This is a CYA, make sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted in terms of state compliance, HR issues, so that you don't get screwed if something goes wrong. And that management aspect of just having all of that in line, that's one thing. And then leadership is another thing. But if you're hampered by this management stuff, by all this HR stuff, then you're not focusing on being a leader, on making better systems and working on your SOP manual. So it's one of those, like, you got to do this and you got to do it right. So why not hire someone like this to just take care of all that crap for you?
And, it's funny because I initially reached out to them. My main chief complaint was vacation.
Huh.
So I have a team of 8 people in total that work for us at the office, and all 8 of them asked for time off in the last 3 months. So, you know what I mean? Like, it just got to be like, oh my goodness, like, I got to have a way of handling this that's not, whatever I'm feeling. You know what I mean? Like, we got to have some sort of solid way. And I hate that they have to keep going to me. We have an office manager. I'd like it to just go everything through them, but we have to create some sort of guidelines. And so that was what initially prompted us to explore this option. And then, we realized that, well, I think we didn't realize how much we needed this more than we initially thought. So very, very happy we have it now.
Perfect. Cool. Well, hopefully people got a lot out of that, and they realize that they don't want to mess with that themselves. It's not a DIY thing. Just friggin' hire someone and move on with your life. Great episode. We will talk with you guys next week on the Shared Practices podcast.